How's it going?
Hey Joe, what's up, man?
A lot and not too much. How about yourself?
Well, as you know, it's Monday morning for me, and it's Super Bowl Sunday for you. But I can just tell you, the future is bright and beautiful, and it's a lovely Monday morning.
Well, if it's lovely in Sydney, then it's got to be. I talked to another friend in Sydney, and they're like, it's really hot there right now, but
It
I'm not
is,
sure what that
but
means.
I have air conditioning, as one hopefully will these days. Having said that, I tried to get air conditioning last summer for a member of my family, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we can install it in 2 years," and I was like, "That's ridiculous." But I had to shop around a lot to actually find someone who would install it that summer. So, so it might be time to get out of the AI business and into the AC business.
Oh, you joke. I've actually thought about that pretty
Yeah,
heavily.
I was half joking. Exactly. I want to get into
Yeah.
carpentry or something.
No, it's yeah, I've always found that the trades are pretty steady work no matter what, right? I don't care how fancy your AI is, as long as humans are under going to need things like air conditioning or whatever. So,
Yeah.
so
I've
it
got a
is.
good friend whose investment philosophy, he invests in software, a bit of hardware, that type of stuff, but he's like, I mostly want to invest in machines that build things,
Mhm.
essentially.
Yeah.
That seems pretty, you know, reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts these days on sort of the trajectory of AI and maybe physical automation? Because we always talk about AI in terms of what it's going to do to programmers, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But like, what do you think it does to the world of bits and or atoms?
That's such a great question, and something I don't think about enough because, my background's in research science and data science and machine learning, but very much like the data science side of things. And so, I help a lot of people build software-based, LLM-based AI systems and teach a lot in that space. And it's so nascent that, like, we're still seeing, looking through the traces of your conversations and your data, there's so many hallucinations, so many failure modes. I actually think, you know, the classic form of debugging in software, now what we need to do in AI is error analysis, essentially, which involves kind of zen and the art of looking at your data. So
Hmm.
even in a single conversation, like pre robotics and these types of things, and pre atoms, we're still so early. So I don't really. I'm excited about that future, but I think
Yeah.
it's pretty far away. It feels like future music or science fiction to me at the moment.
Yeah, it does feel like it for sure. I remember some of my VC friends are like, 'cause I mentioned construction work is like something I've toyed with, maybe starting a construction company or something. Who knows, right? But you got so many ideas on the plate. But they're like, oh, well, aren't you afraid of like Boston Dynamics or doing this stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. If you've ever had to renovate an old home, and you might think twice about that. I mean, half these people, I
Without a
don't think
doubt.
they've done. I don't think these people have done like a hard work of labor in their life. So
Yeah.
their day of hard work. So I'm just like, I don't know. Come try it for a bit and see. but but
And funnily,
it's
I
yeah.
was just watching one of Jan LeCun's new talks at the AI Action Summit, and
Oh, Paris.
he
Is that the one?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And he
Interesting.
spoke a lot about, the need for different types of quote unquote artificial intelligence, integrating AI and robotics. And he knows more about this than I do. I want to be very clear about that. But he seems to be of the opinion that transformer based architectures aren't really the way forward for a lot of this stuff. And I don't know enough
Yeah.
about it, in all honesty, but I wouldn't trust him on all the things. I would trust him with respect to his knowledge of transformer architectures and their capabilities. And it does make sense to me that next token prediction isn't going to be the thing which gets us to, all these wonderful things that you and I would like as well.
Yeah, what was it called? JEPA, I think it was one of the models or the approaches that he said would be
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the ways towards AGI is what he was describing. I think it was. He's like
Yep,
LLMs aren't really going to
exactly.
get us there. And I'm like, yeah, probably not.
Yeah, and he uses the term ami, the French word for friend, which they use at Meta, which is automated machine intelligence as well, which they prefer
Mm,
to AGI and ASI and those types of things, which I think is a
mm,
nice
interesting.
reframing just because AGI feels the term almost has like religious connotations for me, and like, can we create our own intelligence, and it's almost, can we create consciousness and awareness, and those questions are for philosophers, not for me.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I did a podcast recently with John Thompson, who's been in the machine learning space for ages, and he's coming up with a new book, the path to AGI and so forth, right? So I think everyone's got ideas on what this looks like, and
Mm.
but then if you look at like OpenAI and Microsoft, I think their agreement of what AGI was $100 billion in profit, I believe, from their partnership. So
Hmm.
obviously that's AI.
I, well, I actually love that as a definition for and it lifts the veil as well, right? It's like what's driving a lot of this value to be created, but also the desire for capital.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of land grabby stuff as well going on, to be honest.
You
And
don't say.
yeah, but I'm also, and we've chatted about this in the past and messaged about a bit, but I'm just really excited. You know, I've been working in ML and data science and AI stuff for over a decade, and in like academic research in biology and physics and math before that. But this is the first time that I think classic software engineers and even product managers and UX people can come in and start building. Not necessarily understanding all the ins and outs of like load balancers and CUDA kernels and all of this type of stuff, but there's a huge opening for a lot of people to bring all their different skill sets to
Oh yeah.
building AI systems. Yeah, and I don't just mean writing code or like what people classically think developers do, but actually building robust AI systems. And I think that's super exciting as well.
Yeah. What would that look like to you?
That's a good question. So I kind of hinted at this before. One, and I'm just playing with these ideas at the moment, but from what I've seen in the field, I think classical debugging in software a lot of the time involves like the behavior you want of the system. You can write relatively tightly scoped tests. Of course, this is modulo a lot of important details, but you run those tests, they work. You may update at some point, change some of the tests, but you have a finite set of relatively tightly scoped tests. Whereas with data-powered software, whether that's machine learning, statistical inference, AI, whatever we want to call it, with software powered by data, particularly LLMs, we get like this non-deterministic behavior, right? And the entropy of the real world seeps into these systems through data and through this non-determinism. So how do you debug? And I think a lot of it comes down to a scientific mindset as well of failure modes and error analysis, right? So a lot of it is looking at your data, and there's a beautiful video that I can find. It's Andrew Ng in like his first ML course on Coursera or something. It's a short video on, I think he calls it error analysis, and he takes the example of an image detection algorithm, cats versus dogs, I think. And he's like, if it's 90% accuracy, and you notice that several of the examples of cats are mislabeled as dogs, and it's because it's a white cat being mislabeled as a Samoyed or whatever it is, maybe you'll try to figure out how to fix that. And he's like, but if you step back and notice that's only 1 in 1,000 times, that will give your model next to no lift. Whereas if it happened 30% of the time, maybe you focus on that because you've done your error analysis. Now, funnily, how do you do that error analysis? One way is to put all this stuff in a spreadsheet, do pivot tables, all of this stuff, right? The results emerge, then you start fixing those parts of the pipeline. It's exactly the same and even more devilish in AI where, let's say you have some information retrieval system, RAG, for example, and you've got like embeddings, then you've got your generative AI model, then you've got your OCR stuff. Perhaps like changing between GPT 3 or 4 or Mini, whatever it is, and Claude Sonnet 3.5 isn't the biggest issue. Perhaps even your embedding model isn't the biggest issue. Perhaps improving your OCR, how your PDF is read, will give you the most lift. And funnily, this process of looking at failure modes, figuring out what users are doing, is a product manager mindset and a UX designer mindset, right? So if they can be equipped with some technical skills and then the right relationships in an organization, I think PMs, UX people, in addition, SWEs now, software engineers, we don't have to train models anymore in the way we used to. So there are huge inroads for them. It just requires a big reshift in what we think of as testing, evaluation, and debugging. And actually, I taught a course recently and someone mentioned in their organization, they're thinking of changing the word testing because when data scientists and ML people use the word test, they don't think a test should succeed. If your tests succeed all the time, something that doesn't pass the sniff test, right? Whereas for a lot of software engineers, you do want 100% test coverage and passing. So, and I know that was a kind of a random walk of ideas, but I do think this is part of the story of what we need to do and who can get involved as well.
Yeah, I mean, the failure modes is an interesting thing, and it kind of brings back a question I've had. And maybe we talked about this at the MLOps conference where you're hosting our panel. Um, but it brings back. So you mentioned we don't need to do a machine learning as we used to, but I'm wondering how much of that is true. Like, because these LLMs are really expensive, and they're kind of very general. But my concern sometimes is like old school, basically non OpenAI API calls or Anthropic API calls is like, that kind of goes by the wayside where we're training pretty simple models, right? I think, but there was a good
Yeah.
paper that Paco Nathan referred me to a while ago where it was, sort of the scaling limits of LLMs and really when it looked at, the use cases of really, high-powered generative AI and large language models against even things like logistic regression. I think it was like case of epilepsy or something, epilepsy. It was like just logistic regression worked just fine versus very complicated stuff. So, like, what are your thoughts in terms of like this these failure modes and testing? Do we just go all in on the complicated stuff and forget the simpler things, or what do you think?
You've hit the nail on the head, and I appreciate the nuance you've added to this because the way I think about it, perhaps you want to start with state-of-the-art, easy-to-use models, but as soon as you start to scale products with, state-of-the-art OpenAI models, whatever it is, cost concerns, latency concerns, whole variety of things, right? Not to mention when I also almost want to start a website, Killed by Google. I think we should start Killed by OpenAI because
Oh, geez.
and the migration costs when but having said that, so when first building out a prototype, I definitely suggest people use OpenAI or whatever, Gemini, whatever it is. Insert name of large lab here, right? Actually, currently, I'd probably go with Gemini for a variety of reasons. But
Gemini's really good.
it's sick, man. And funnily, they've and I actually posted about this on LinkedIn. They've done some of the boss moves recently. I think, as you may agree, in some ways, I think one of the ways to win is to have a very good developer relations team. And they've now got Paige Bailey, Logan Kilpatrick. They just hired Philip Schmidt from Hugging Face, and now they're like, who wants to come and work with us? And that is, I mean, that is huge. And I do think something we've seen is, I want to be careful here because there's a lot happening, but I think it's safe to say that OpenAI doesn't always care about the developer experience, right? And I think the more you care about the developer experience, that's why Keras, at least in the machine learning and deep learning space, became so big. That's why scikit-learn, why Spacey, that's why Requests is one of the best packages ever, because it's so simple to use as a developer. But back to your question around what models we want to be using, I actually encourage people after they've developed a quick prototype then to play around with different and cheaper models. So I encourage people to move away from the vendors for some models and go to Hugging Face, for example. So I'm looking at a model that I encourage people, sentence transformer model, all mini LM, L6 V2, happy to link to it. It has 78 million downloads a month, and it is incredible for sentences and paragraphs up to, 300 words or so, whatever it is, right? It may be characters. Which would be very different, but I think it is words. I need to make sure that's the case. But 256 words. So I do think using these smaller models as you iterate on a product, and for more sophisticated teams and orgs, a pattern I've seen is starting on vendor-based models, and then after some time and after getting a wide array of conversations with users and having test coverage around those and having your evaluation framework, all of the things we require of software that we seem to have forgotten about. After all of these, migrating to a smaller self-hosted model and fine-tuning on all those conversations. So you can get, if you fine-tune on your conversations, state-of-the-art performance using smaller llama like 7B, 8B models and that type of stuff. So I think this, of course, then there are maintenance costs associated with, self-hosting these models and all of that. But that's to say, totally agree on migration to other models. And I think the biggest shift here that I'm referring to with other people being able to do things isn't just the vendor APIs. It's the fact that we no longer necessarily have to train models. Because I think that was one of the big rate limiting factors for humans.
No, that's what I was asking, though. I mean, I think training models is. Do you still think that we need to train models at all, or is that gone by the wayside? Even simple sklearn models that just do a thing,
Yeah,
classification.
I think some people do, but I'm excited that we're able to build data informed and data powered systems without doing it. Now the jury's out, which will be necessarily more powerful, but I'm relatively bullish, and I've seen a lot of people build good products without training models these days. Also, to be clear, in quote unquote prompt, I'll call it prompt alchemy, not prompt engineering. But everyone has
Yeah.
their own term. I think this is one of the funny things. If you give few shot examples or do some serious prompt engineering, because of the probabilistic nature of these models, what you're doing is you're sculpting probabilistically the output space of the model, essentially, right? And that's relatively similar to fine-tuning the model. And I don't know enough about this, but there have been people who've researched the math and practice of this, showing that you can really achieve fine-tuning results a lot of the time by doing clever prompting. So in that sense, I think prompt engineering can be thought of as quote-unquote training. Now, that's an analogy. I want to be clear about that. But I think it works in
Yeah.
some ways.
Interesting.
It's still incantations and feels like wizardry, but I would say ML has felt like that for a long time as well. I don't think it's necessarily a new thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all still trying to figure this out, which is
Yeah,
funny. I mean, I joke with a lot of friends too, and I said this on my podcast before, but it feels like, an alien technology has landed on Earth, and we're just trying to figure out how to, poke and prod at it and communicate with it and so forth. It's even people I know who are very deep into this, and some people who've created these models and were responsible for the early days of this stuff, they still are trying to figure it out themselves, and so
totally. I
it's
love the
hard.
idea of an alien technology. Particularly, it's weird because it does feel alien. It's very uncanny valley. And also, let's not forget, it's the first time that we're really able to talk with computers at scale, like using our own language, which is pretty amazing, to be honest. Your alien mention did remind me, though. Michael Jordan, the Michael Jordan of machine learning, both literally and figuratively, he he has a wonderful essay called "How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Economics," something like that, which
Oh,
I'll
interesting.
share. And
Yeah.
and he talks about, he's like, let's think about the term AI and let's think about if a Martian came down to Earth, what would they think of as an intelligent system? And he said one example is they could look at markets and see how intelligent they are in a variety of ways, like irrespective of weather and all types of other factors. Like a lot of restaurants manage to have what they need to supply the demand for their restaurant on any given day, and we have a global supply chain which possesses lots of aspects of intelligence in order to create this. And he says, why are we focusing on mimicking human intelligence? What he says David Donahoe refers to as recycled intelligence, which I like as a term because it really speaks to the fact that we're getting intelligence from training data. He's like, why aren't we thinking about creating systems that, mimic the intelligence of markets? And of course, one thing he's referencing there is that we kind of have with some tech products, but maybe not as much as we could, right? But I think having a more expansive view of what artificial intelligence could be is interesting at the very least.
Yeah, there's a book in my queue. What is it? Why Machines Will Never Rule the World. Which I should read. Yeah, artificial intelligence without fear, right? And yeah, basically he goes on to say that for a lot of reasons, the authors believe that AGI, as we come to explain it, where it's human-like, is probably not going to happen, just because you're dealing with computers and there's a bunch of stuff here. I need to read it, but it did say, yeah, you basically can't mathematically mimic, you know, the human brain. I don't know. I need to read the book, but it is interesting because
Yeah.
it did get me thinking about what you were talking about with Michael Jordan's paper, where do we need to mimic humans at all? I think this is, if you look at what we're trying to do, like what's the objective function of all this stuff? Um, why do we need to mimic humans? I think it's nice. It's what we've tried to do for a long time.
Mm.
But part of it is kind of like I don't know. Again, a really trite example at this point is AlphaGo. Like it learned Go, it did really well, but it did it in a way that wasn't human, and it solved
Yeah.
it bait the game in ways you're just like I have no idea how the hell that did that, but it did it and it won.
Totally. And I love that example because I played a bit of Go, but not enough. A bit of Go, but not enough to really understand what's happening. But when Alpha Zero, whatever it was, played chess as well, and I play a bunch of chess, and I didn't quite understand, but I watched a lot of chess experts talking about it, and they were like, hey, this made moves which seemed dumb. That I was like, no, that's dumb, clearly. And then it opened up a space of games I've never seen before, right? Like, there's combinatorial explosion at play, right? So we haven't seen all the chess games as
Yeah.
humans, but these things figured out how to explore parts of the game that's new to humans, and that's beautiful to me. That's discovery, right? And exploration. So yeah, to your point, I think why do we want to mimic human intelligence when they could do so many other things potentially as well?
I think it's well, I mean, for a lot of reasons, really, it's an interesting research problem, and if you can solve it, then I guess you have a new friend and possible overlord. But I think it also makes for a really good sales pitch.
Yes.
And so, Sam Altman, I guess, promised our President Trump that we would have AGI by the end of his term. You know, so invest in all of our data centers. So
Well,
it's
t- two people who I have absolute faith in, Joe.
yeah.
The other thing I do think there is, I mentioned this before, an element of religiosity. Like, I think some humans like, how cool would it be to be able to create us? It feels like, remember there's an episode of The Simpsons where it's a Treehouse of Horror episode where Bart like has a dish or something, or maybe Lisa, and they create some little colony of little like people and poke them, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm cool, I can create this. And of course I'm not reducing Sam Altman to Bart Simpson in a horror episode of The Simpsons, but I kind of am as well. So
I haven't seen that one. My kids watch The Simpsons all the time. I'm pretty sure
awesome.
they've seen it, and I used to watch it a lot when I was a kid, but I've probably
I
forgotten all
loved
of
it
it
as a kid. Hey,
yeah,
do they watch Bluey? Is Bluey a thing over there?
Bluey's not really a thing, not that I know of. I mean,
Okay.
it's like, yeah. What is Bluey, like an Australian show, or what is
Yeah,
Bluey?
it's about a dog and his dad, I think, and yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I don't think it's a thing here. It's like South Park. When you're a teenager, is what you watch. If you're into cartoons,
Yeah.
Simpsons when you're a kid, because it's a really smart humor. But yeah,
But South
SpongeBob
Park as
too.
well, man. How did and feel free to edit this out if we're
Oh
diverging
no,
too much.
no, no,
But
it was fine.
how did South? I mean, South Park is incredible. I check it every now and then, but it still somehow remains to be incredibly topical, offensive to everyone, and uncancelable. Like they've. I think maybe because they like everyone's a target. It's chill, or because it's their. But it's fascinating that they've remained kind of at the top of their game in a lot of ways.
Oh, they really have, and they've stayed relevant for a couple decades. And in fact, my kid was asking the other day, like, how long has South Park been around? And I was like, oh, geez, almost 20 years,
Yeah,
maybe 20 years at this point.
a
But
bit
yeah, I mean,
more, a bit more. Yeah,
yeah, probably right. Yeah, I mean, it's been
yeah.
relevant for a
Say
long
25.
time. I think you're right because everyone is they're an equal opportunity offender. So they're not
Yeah,
taking one
yeah,
side or the other.
exactly.
It's just
Yeah,
and they also go after just like the most culturally relevant people in ways that everyone wants them to go after. Like if they're,
yeah.
they're always kind of this out of left field but hilarious takes on people. So
Mm.
yeah, it's always highly relevant. Yeah, it's funny too because even in reality they're culturally relevant. Like there's a restaurant called Casa Bonita in Denver, which is a Mexican restaurant that I think went under during COVID, and the Trey and Stone bought the restaurant because that was in South Park a lot. So
Yeah,
Casa Bonita
right.
was like the really like terrible food, I guess, but like the ambiance is like your Casa Bonita, so you'll be there. But yeah, they bought it and they turned it into like a real life meme. So that's
Awesome.
just yeah. Or showing up to the Oscars or whatever it was, high on acid that one time when they're dressed in like dresses, like that was hilarious.
Amazing.
Like
Absolutely
totally on brand.
amazing.
Yeah, that's I mean, but yeah,
There's also I don't have any kids, so I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. There's a YouTube clip. It's one of them, like one of the creators of South Park with his kid who does the voice of Baby Ike, and it's him telling his kid what to say, and then his kid just being outrageous into this microphone. Some of the
that's so
funniest
funny.
stuff I've
I
ever
haven't
seen.
seen
I'll
that.
send it to you afterwards. Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, and those are the kinds of things that I just appreciate about I don't know, I don't want to call them media, right? But they're just two hilarious guys who are just doing their thing. And
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
in my opinion, and this is very reductive, but like South Park is capitalism working well. It's
that's
like
very true.
you know what like it's like something which is entertaining, makes people think, you have laughs, you chat with friends about it, and you give them money to do it. Great. I love that.
It's a
But
dream
I am
job.
also the other, I am interested from your perspective. And we've been talking around this, but once again, I actually think with the rise of all these models as well, your models aren't going to be your quote unquote defensible mode. I'm sorry for speaking like a VC, but we can double click on a number of things as well. I
Let's circle back on that.
exactly. I do think what we're going to see more and more is the importance of high signal, good quality, curated data sets as being business differentiators. And that speaks a lot to your world. So I'm interested, like data engineering, perhaps not the sexiest quote unquote thing right now. Of course, one of the most important things. And also for people who are thinking about reskilling, one of the most lucrative things you could do if you're interested in that type of thing. But I'm just interested in your thoughts on the role of data engineering in the current AI landscape.
It's interesting. There's a couple schools of thought here. I think that one of them is data engineering is obviously it's important, right? There's the notion of data-centric AI, which entering
Yeah.
espoused. I think in 2021 he started talking about that. But I
Which
mean,
we
if you've been in
forgot
the
about recently with, at least we forgot about it on LinkedIn at least, right?
oh for
With the
sure,
rise
yeah.
of models. So, but we'll be back there.
Oh yeah,
What
love
did
the
I,
balloons there.
what did I do?
I think it's just like what is it? This I think will do it.
Yeah, I think I did like a Richard Nixon
But you do this
double
and it'll do
peace
it. And then
sign. Yeah,
balloons,
yeah.
right? Or confetti. So, and then yeah, that's fun. We just did the whole show. So, but it was interesting, and I think that the proof for me was when Andrew decided to do a data engineering course,
Yeah.
based on my book, right? I mean, that was like I was like, okay, here's one of the godfathers of the field who is investing a lot of money and resources into this course. I mean, it took us over a year to do this, and and so that showed me, okay, if somebody like him, and every time I talk to him, he's like, this, a lot of people are really going to benefit from this, right?
Yep.
Because and I was like, yeah, absolutely, because it fills a gap where I think a lot of the data and machine learning education. I'm not going to include AI, and this is still new-ish. But a lot of the education resources were going to how do you make models? How do you do this? How do you do that? And like, no, there's very little attention paid to the underlying data.
Hmm.
And to that extent, there were discussions about, okay, so how do you make data sets that are unbiased and ethical and all this stuff? Data quality wasn't really discussed very much. Just throw all the data into your model and it'll just figure it out. I think you know how that goes. And so understanding the quality, understanding the distributions, understanding the bias, all this stuff is like insanely important. But that's one of the things that data engineering, and if you take a step back, data engineering was traditionally more focused on analytical use cases, but the world's, the field's evolving very quickly to focus on machine learning use cases as well. I think the interesting intersection will be ML ops and data engineering and machine learning engineering, and I guess now Chip Wynn's new book, AI engineering, and in all these fields. And so that's what I'm very interested in. But the underlying data is the mode, as you say.
Hmm.
The models aren't. I mean, the data is going to make the model. So, but it's the data that's the interesting part. The
Yep.
model's just math at the end of the day. right?
Absolutely.
You can figure out more clever ways of training your model, and maybe more clever math. And at the end of the day, the data is still the input into this, no matter what. It doesn't work the other way. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of these are just the data is just one of the laws of gravity you're not going to get away from at all, and that is the moat. I would say if you're a company, take your data seriously. Figure out, its quality. Figure out if it's modeled right, so you can read it correctly and query it in an
Mm.
efficient way. Because the problem right now is, you saw this last year. Everyone was trying to, play with text to SQL. Just write a prompt and it'll write the SQL.
Yep.
I think people are realizing the limitations of this in a lot of cases, and there's new methods, new guardrails being put in place. But at the end of the day, you have text data, you have images, you have structured data, and so forth. All this needs to be taken into account, and that's where data engineering is going to play a role. The other school of thought is, this will go back to probably a topic we'll touch on in a bit, but with all the advances in agents and everything else, data engineers go away, and you don't need all this because agents will just handle this. Now, you could extrapolate that same argument
I love that.
to basically anything else you do with a keyboard, whether it's technology related or not, like if you're an
Mm.
accountant and so forth. So I think it's so I heard that from one of my friends, and I was like, maybe not. I mean, if that's the case, then the same technology can universally be applied to basically any problem where there's a hint of domain expertise and data. But data is one of these things where, again, I think the difference between the automating for other desk jobs and data related stuff or ML is like data is the input. So if the AI models can understand what good inputs are and understand what it needs, and I guess maybe that problem solved and built the infrastructure and so forth. I mean, it's totally within reason to do it. I mean, you could probably come up with a pretty crappy prototype of that whole workflow right now if you wanted to, probably over a weekend, to be frank. Wouldn't be that
Without a
hard.
doubt. And that's actually one of the most exciting things about now. Now, we'll talk about proof of concept purgatory and demoitis and that type of stuff because we've lived through it. But the ability to create quick prototypes and ship them to friends or colleagues or whatever is absolutely wild.
It's awesome.
There's something you said in there, which I think is super important. We've talked about 2025. I mean, we haven't yet, but as a community, we've talked about 2025 being the year of agents. We can dissect, the reality of that and the absurdity of what that implies and what it actually means. I do think 2024, among other things, was the year of lots of really fucking cool multimodal foundation models coming out. And I
Yeah, for
think
sure.
2025 will be, one of the things will be is the year of trying to integrate them into products.
Yep.
And using agentic stuff and by agentic stuff, I mean like maybe using some tools that aren't part of the LLM and stuff like that. And maybe we'll get to this, but
Yeah.
the agentic space is a continuum or a multi-dimensional space, right? But I think the multimodal models are going to become increasingly important. And I'm just wondering, you've thought about this a lot with respect to, I suppose, data infrastructure and data engineering and having robust data models as well, right?
Tons. I mean, I'm writing a whole book on this right now.
That's
It's called,
great. I didn't
yeah,
realize that.
it's
But
on data modeling, right? But it's on what I call mixed model arts, and it's just about multimodal, multi-use case modeling. Like obviously modeling for certain use cases, but being cognizant of how to model data across use cases using all sorts of data. Like traditionally, we've been focused on how do you model data for rows and columns. That's great. I think I wrote over the weekend that people who are very table centric are sort of the data equivalent of flat earthers, and so I'm gonna win a lot of friends with that or lose more, but whatever. I mean, it's this notion that you're absolutely right. I feel like there's the fusion of all these different modes of data and use cases. I think is still that's to be explored. If you think of the data in a lot of enterprises, for example, right, text, structured. Look around and how many cameras do you see in your company? We're getting to creepy land, but we already crossed that bridge. Calls, all this other stuff. What I see is integrating all these things together into sort of some
yeah.
hodgepodge. Now, depends on the country you're in. For example, there might be some concerns about that, but in the U.S., we
Well,
probably won't have any
also,
concerns about that.
I think you hit on a really key point, and one of our mutual friends and colleagues, and someone I think we both love deeply and admire deeply is Catherine Jarmel, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the work she's doing with respect to data privacy, model privacy, working and thinking through all of these things. I mean, there are also concerns of Europe slowing down in terms of the ability to generate the type of technology we're seeing in the US and China.
Oh yeah.
But these conversations around data privacy and that I think are becoming increasingly important, although we've forgotten about a lot of them, at least in US and Australia.
Oh yeah. Yeah. How's it in Australia right now? I mean, what's the notions of AI and data privacy there?
I think the conversation isn't even as sophisticated as it is in the US. I'd say we're
Interesting.
several years behind. On a government level, though, there are definitely people starting to have these conversations. But the thing is, we don't have. It's a different conversation, right? Because we're even talking about regulating American companies, and this is one of the weird things about our age is kind of like like how does Facebook or Meta operate in Australia is a
Well, at
question.
least
And
you had that thing with the social media and teenagers recently.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, pretty interesting and pretty wild. And I do think I understand the intention. I think part of me is like, I know parents have so much to do, teachers have so much to do. I think part of me feels that I would like to see more conversations like this happen in the school and at home, as opposed to being outsourced to federal government legislation. Now, I want to make very clear, I'm not a right-wing libertarian when I say things like that, and I feel because a bunch of American listeners, I definitely want to make clear that's the case. It isn't right,
I mean,
but
it might be might be
yeah.
popular these days, actually. So,
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, who knows? It's get a lot of mixed messages.
yeah.
The other thing I think when talking about how to build AI systems, and you mentioned mixed model arts, and I presume that's a reference to mixed martial arts.
Hmm.
And you do jujitsu, is that right?
I've done a lot of things. Yeah, boxing,
Okay.
MMA. Yeah,
Well, I
jiu-jitsu.
am something. Yeah, something I find interesting with AI. I had this with some machine learning and deep learning. When you build deep learning models and neural networks, something that happens. You print in your REPL or to terminal the epochs rolling on in. You see them roll in with accuracy and loss, and it goes down. Sometimes it goes up, and there's this almost, I call it Zen and the art of deep learning, right? And I think there is a practice here. There's artistry involved, there's science involved, but similarly with error analysis in AI, looking at your data roll and looking at the traces, the conversations, there is almost. So I've never done martial arts. I've done some. Well, I think maybe it's a slow martial art. I've done a bunch of qigong and tai chi, and
It
and
is.
there's a feeling and a practice, and I don't want to get too woo woo or whatever, but like legit, there's a practice to this that is both science and art and also vibe, man.
Hmm. Yeah. No, there's vibe, and I think I wish more people would talk about that because you're always, but it's you sort of develop a sixth sense of your data after a bit. You just
Intuition,
do.
exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's the missing link is but you need that. I mean, you smell testing data, for example, right? I
Yeah,
mean, the classic example is when Google had that really horrible snafu with the pictures of gorillas. If they just algorithmically tried to do that, well, I guess they tried. They had to basically Google gorillas not, it's not attached to any images, certain types of images at least.
yeah,
Because the whole thing was it brought up images of African American people or just
yeah.
people of black descent, and so it's like you can't. But that's one of those things where if you just let a machine go and do that, it wouldn't know whether that's good or not. It was just trained on the data it trained on. It took humans to
Exactly.
like what the fuck, like why are you doing that? it's
Yeah, and I think that example's super key. I mentioned the term recycled intelligence before instead of artificial intelligence. I also love the term artificial stupidity. And I
I
think
like
this
that.
is an example of like deeply racist and highly problematic artificial stupidity. There are less, I suppose, like morally and ethically challenging examples. There was one where it was like a dog detection, dog versus wolf or something like that. Or yeah, dog versus something in the snow. And the point is what it learnt wasn't anything about the animal. It just learnt there was snow in the picture, essentially.
Hmm.
So when you gave it something else in snow, it would predict whatever it thought was in the snow. And that's what happens with these. And that's the type of thing humans are great at differentiating between, whereas computers aren't yet. But once again, what do we want computers to do? what do we want humans to do?
Yeah. I think that's going to be one of the big questions of our time, though. Like, what do we want computers and humans to do? It's, I think, economically, at least, if we're talking about, like, work, I mean, the motivation is to have machines do everything if you can. I think that sounds callous. Maybe that's a bit of an American response, but
I think everyone would like machines to do more. I do think the question is of what happens to the wealth generated then, right?
that's
Because
a good question.
and the other thing is, like, technology rarely automates jobs. Technology automates tasks, and it's generally us collectively. A lot of power imbalances, but the decision of what jobs are happens at a social level, a political level, all of these at a corporate level, right? So it isn't as though technology does automate jobs. We get to decide how we want to shift value with respect to what work humans do. One problem, of course, is those decisions seem to be made by the fewer and fewer these days.
That's just it.
And I do think with all of this technology is incredibly becoming democratized. I think, particularly like Andrej Karpathy dropped a new video about introduction to LLMs last week, and I mean, we live in a world where that bro can like put stuff out on YouTube to tens of millions of people, and he does that. What this is incredible,
That's
right?
cool.
But the fact that I think with AI, you can do a lot more with fewer people, right? Which is super cool. But when we live in like part of capitalism as it's evolved, particularly with like network effects in tech and the kind of how connected we are, it's kind of winner takes all, and the first winner has an outsized advantage to take all. So one concern is that fewer people can create a lot more quote unquote value, capture that value, and then no one else gets everything, right?
Yep.
So the technology isn't the concern; it's how it's used in that type of way, which is pretty scary.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I'm curious to see what happens, in places like America where it's just as we stand right now, as we talk, the government here is being reshuffled. I'll leave it at that because it's.
Yeah.
But who knows? But it's like I think the expectation is that from what I've been hearing that AI is going to run a lot of the government at some point, and so that's what the speculation should be interesting to see. But what does that mean for others? I don't know. But as you point out, it's people are determining, okay, so these are the types of jobs that computers are going to be doing. And it reminds me of actually what Mira Murati, the old CTO from OpenAI, was saying when she was talking about, what happens to, the creative people who no longer can make money off their art. She's like, well, maybe people shouldn't have been doing that work anyway. And I'm like, I thought that was a really condescending remark because it was essentially, it was a very tone-deaf way of putting it that OpenAI basically sucked in all of the data from creators, didn't let them know, no recourse. And it's like, sorry, we can just do what you do now. Have a nice day.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a very tone deaf reply.
Yeah, it is tone deaf, and that's a very polite term, Joe, which I appreciate. I do think it's tone deaf, and as you kind of hinted at, entirely hypocritical, right? Given that they've sucked up swathes of the history of human creativity, at least in words and some images. And the truth is, as a society, once again, who makes these decisions and who decides isn't obvious. Well, maybe it is, and it isn't everyone. But as a society, hopefully we get to decide where we assign value. And we can say we want more music and these types of things. I think part of the challenge is, I wonder what she'd say if she had a conversation around what the internet, which is an incredible thing, did to broadsheet journalism and high quality journalism, right? I'd be hard pressed to see an argument that we haven't lost something that was important to us as a culture quite quickly, and we want more incentives for artists, right? Like if she's saying, oh, we don't want more incentives for people to create cultural goods, she's a fucking joker, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, the whole thing was like, well, then maybe they shouldn't have been doing it anyway. And I'm like, okay, well, when the job of a CEO is also automated, I guess you shouldn't have been doing that job either. So it's just nuts. And you do point out, I'm curious in Australia how this has been, but in the U.S. the amount of local news outlets has dwindled to basically none at this point. Which means you don't have accountability at a local level for what happens in politics or anything really. And it's local journalism has suffered a huge decline. Whereas, as you point out, pre-internet journalism, it was a job. Now journalism is,
Absolutely.
I guess, you're a blogger and a podcaster, or you have your phone and you just put everything on TikTok. That's journalism these days.
Yeah, totally. And it's relatively similar here. I mean, we've got one of our greatest exports is Rupert Murdoch, right? Like
Oh yeah,
one of the great monsters. Like, and I don't think there are lots of real monsters in the world, but what this bro has done for Western politics and the shallowification of, our entire culture. I mean, it was like 30
yeah,
years ago. He was if you wanted to run for politics in Australia or the UK at that point, you had to sit down with him and tell him why you could be the next prime minister. And of course, there are photos of him recently with 45 and 47, right? So I
yeah,
think we do like it plays to the least common denominator, is entirely predatory. And yeah, we don't see a lot of good things these days. I do think there's a lot of great things online, but I do think part of this, Cory Doctorow and Rebecca Solnit, I think her name is, have a great book called Choke Point Capitalism. And I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but it provides a really nice mental model or thoughtful mental model for how tech has done a lot of great, but how they've
yeah.
essentially formed choke points between cultural consumers and producers.
Oh yeah,
And suck up a huge amount of that value. And I think Google is a very interesting example. Spotify is a very obvious example.
oh yeah.
But essentially they act like bridge trolls where they're just like taking tolls, essentially.
Yeah, and this was a book was a choke point capitalism. I mean,
Yeah,
I love Cory
exactly.
Doctorow. He's awesome. I was actually having
Incredible,
this
huh?
discussion, the other day with somebody where they're and maybe they're from Europe, but I think the discussion was sort of around well, inevitably got to like Spotify and musicians and like, well, if you don't want to be on Spotify, then don't be on it. It's like if you're a musician, and I DJ and I have a lot of musicians, and it's like if you're not on Spotify, you're basically invisible. You have to be on
Yep.
Spotify. There's not a choice. It sucks because they took what was a good revenue source, which was album sales, and now you make no money off album sales. And now you have to make your money off merch, touring, and so. And there are bands that do really well doing that, but it's like the whole point is people had to evolve their business model because that was basically Spotify is a choke point. You go to Bandcamp if you want. And whatever. One of my friends today was actually posting about how DJs are really cheap because they won't spend 89 cents on a download from Beatport, right? And and they'll just try and rip it some music other ways. When I was DJing full time, it was like what vinyl records were still actually that was how you DJed. This was before
Yeah.
CDs, and so if you spend gobs of money on like just I don't even know how many kilos of records you'd be lugging around. That's how you did it, right? And now everything is basically right there, but how you make music change. I know people had record labels and they don't have record labels anymore. But if you have a label, now it's
Yeah.
more of a means to promote your stuff. But because in DJing at least, right, like you still have to produce music, but that's basically to show like I don't know, showcase your tracks, I guess. But in at least in the club music, it's like tracks have basically a lifespan of less than a week. That's on purpose. So you're always having to
Totally.
innovate, right? Always innovating.
Yeah, and I'm happy you brought up studios because, like, I hear people in my head being like, "Oh, but Hugo, studios were choke points as well," and I totally agree.
Oh,
I'm
they
not
were,
saying
yeah.
conceptually this is something new. I do think in terms of the technology and the ability for the studios or choke points or platforms to rapidly iterate based upon rapid, massive online experiments they're doing constantly that interact with our biochemistry.
Yeah.
That is a new thing, and the degree of
Hmm.
personalization is a new thing, and
The
the
algorithm
way
stuff.
they
Yeah.
can and there's like some pretty like stuff that makes me like it can be pretty predatory and be like some lower brainstem stuff or whatever they say, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it sucks because you have to play the game, right? If you're writing content online, right? It's Google still matters a lot. Now you have to think about is my content going to get I guess what would they call it what did I call it back in the day? I can't remember. But something like LLM optimization as well. So LLM. So basically, it's just like you do a search engine optimization. Now you got to figure out how your
Yeah,
LLM is going to I sometimes look myself up on ChatGPT just to see what it says, and it's getting better. Like it's getting more accurate responses, more up to date. So I think that's interesting. But now you have to optimize for that. And if you're not on Google, now if you're not in the LLMs, when you're writing at least, like you're invisible. That's reality.
absolutely. And I actually something that just came to mind. I haven't thought about this in a while, but is Stack Overflow and thinking
Oh
about their
yeah.
loss of traffic over the past couple of years. And I I would love a world in which everyone had their own LLM, and maybe like it's a fine-tuned base model or
Hmm.
whatever, like using a llama or something like it. Could be OpenAI. Honestly, I don't care. But what I would love to see is Stack Overflow be able to have a chatbot or an LLM which is based upon all the data that them and their community. And of course, there are questions about Stack Overflow sucking up value from developers, all of that. But places like that, like the New York Times having its own um, LLM, which they don't necessarily need to use OpenAI, but it's based upon all of their data and all of
Yeah.
their cultural value that they've created over hundreds of years, right? Or however long it's been.
Oh
That'd be
yeah.
cool, wouldn't it?
It would be cool. I was actually talking with this about this the other day with Eric Broda, who's working on a new book right now about on AI agents. But I was like, it'll be interesting in the future when all of us have our own agents, and as we're talking about in the context of jobs, right? Like if you have the Hugo bot that can just go work multiple jobs, you don't even need to be there,
Mm,
right? So it's this notion of I think it's definitely one manifestation of what you're talking about, where it's like your own LLM with your own bot. I mean, I'm there's actually currently a Joe bot being worked on as I speak right now. It's through Real Avatar, which is Andrew Ng's group, but like curious to see what that looks like. For
amazing.
better or for worse. Just ask it really dumb questions and get my
Um,
snarky responses.
because you did mention agents, it brought something to mind. I do, I talked about the importance of looking at your data and error analysis, and I do think like error analysis will be the new debugging in a lot of
Mm.
ways. But I do wonder, like when I've helped people build agentic systems and built them myself, like multi agents working together to do web searches and write, summaries of things and those types of things. Whenever you like dive in to look at the traces, you see so many hallucinations. You see so many like things forgetting. It won't use tools that it's promised to use. All of that type of stuff. Now, that isn't to say the idea of self-correcting agents, adding more agents in to help with that is attractive. Feels like LLMs all the way down in some ways. But I suppose once again, what I'm getting at is once you use these tools at the moment, you kind of need to. What a lot of people end up doing is doing that, then realizing they can't even make sense of what's happened and the failure modes.
Bingo.
And they go back to
Yep.
square one and start building it from individual, more structured LLM calls, which is far more akin to software as well, right? And then putting
That's just it.
guardrails around
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, at that point you're back to doing RPA. So
Yeah.
just like okay. Um, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, trust me, I'm starting a new company right now. I've been looking at how to use agents for anything I can, and the only conclusion I have is it's not ready for prime time yet. Like, there's no way I'm just letting this thing run wild. Not yet.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
actually, one of your recent newsletters where you talked about orthodoxy, I'd love to say a few things about or ask questions about
Please,
that with
let's
respect
talk
to
about it.
LLMs. Yeah,
Yeah.
but would you mind? I think you'll do a better job of explaining why you brought up orthodoxy and why it's important than I could.
Well, I brought it up in the context of data modeling, but it really does apply to I think any discipline. Really, there's established ways of doing things, time-tested ways that people have adopted through the course of a long time and a lot of money investment, and hopefully successes. Right? That's orthodoxy. Orthodoxy
Yep.
is assumed to be working because people have adopted it and it works. A good example is looking both ways before you cross the street. Why would you do that? So you don't get hit by a car. Pretty obvious. How do
Yep.
we figure this out? People get hit by cars. You start looking one way, then you start looking the other.
They
It's
don't
just
get hit then.
pretty.
Yeah.
You don't get hit. It's crazy how that works. You can extend this to anything, right? And so, but then there's the opposite notion, which is speed and performance, right? So, and then what I argued with is People want to move fast. People want to deliver value ever more quickly, and sometimes this means taking shortcuts. Sometimes it means doing things faster. Sometimes it means breaking orthodoxy. But if you don't know orthodoxy, how would you know that you're breaking it? How do you know
Yeah.
you're not reinventing the wheel and putting yourself into worse shape? So that was the whole argument and a gist. Yeah.
I love it, and I love the thing you bring up with respect to short term and long term trade offs as well, because you can
Yep.
be fast in the short term, but that the way that can really mess you up in the long term. And Jeremy Howard has always said, and I'm going to butcher this, so I may get it slightly wrong, but when people ask him, "Hey, why do you build packages and libraries and frameworks?" He's like, "Because I'm lazy." And people are like, "What?" And he's like, "I'm the type of lazy. I'll build something now so I don't have to write the same crap for the next decade." So I'm a lazy in the sense that I'm projecting my future self, and I think that's such a simple heuristic and so
That's super
clever.
cool.
But I am interested in what orthodoxy looks like for AI powered applications now. And I think we're getting to a few things, but I think a lot of it does come from everything we figured out in machine learning. That it's really a combination of data and sciencey stuff and software stuff, and how we integrate those two isn't obvious, because once again, I'll frame it like this, but software rarely had the entropy or stochasticity of the real world introduced into it. There were serious designs around what it can do and what it can't do, and now we've changed that with the introduction of data and machine learning and statistics. So the question is, what do we take from the world of data and science, and what do we take from the world of software engineering? And clearly, it's absolutely clear to me, and I assume to you, that testing and evaluation are two of the most important things that almost come from science and software together, right?
I think that's definitely a big piece of it. And Paco Nathan actually brought up something else that I thought was interesting, which was looking at how judges make decisions, like people, like judges in courts. I think that's maybe the third part, right? Because it's because in the past we were dealing with, you could obviously test software that's well established. You could do data quality tests, even ML ops. That's becoming, I think, more baked in. There's, I think, orthodoxy. It's become a practice. I think there's maybe some questions on that. But then, how do you deal with uh, uh, error correction or error pattern analysis on like a reasoning model, for example?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's people doing this obviously because they need to see if it reasons correctly or not. I mean, that's kind of how that works. But then he brought up a good point where it's like, well, if you want to understand how people make really good decisions, look at how a judge makes decisions. Like, shit, yeah, this actually makes a lot of sense. They have to give their reasoning for their decision, and they're very well schooled in this. It's like literally what they do. So it's
Absolutely.
quite cool.
And one thing I'm hearing in there, and of course, judges have all types of expert witnesses involved, and of
Yeah.
course, everyone has their own incentives, of course. But one thing I'm hearing there is bringing in significant, not only domain expertise, but also judges. We hope that judges are some of the deepest thinkers and reasoners in robust logic and reasoning in society, right? You'd hope. So making sure that we have really robust reasoning technologies. The other thing is work with them, right? So
Yeah.
a judge will ask clarifying questions and this type of stuff, right? And when working with a language model, it's very rare for me to ask a question and get what I want straight away. It usually involves having a conversation. So if people are aware of that,
Yeah.
how to work with these things, I think the better off we'll all be.
And that's the practice, right? Knowing how to work with these things, knowing how to
Yeah.
work with these things. I think that's still, that's still a work in progress. Because now you get into something again that we just talked about, kind of with, talking to humans, talking to machines, and whatever the hell these are. But like we're learning how to talk to these things, right? Especially in a multimodal sense. That's where it's going to get interesting. Is right now we're talking in terms of text, but now what are how does this change our when multimodal is like working really good? Like how does this change our way of actually the reverse, right? So like how does this actually change us as people? How does the machine change us?
Yeah.
I can't remember who came up with that. There's somebody who wrote a really good article about this, where we've been adapting ourselves to algorithms for quite a while, right? When back to the writing for the SEO, like that's what you're writing for. Then how do we change our language to communicate with AI? I think that's a very
Absolutely.
fascinating question. It's going to change us more than I think more than we're going to change it.
Yeah, even just think about like credit scores in the US
Yeah.
for example, right? That's an algorithm that we've played. I've got friends like I lived in the US for the best part of a decade, but maybe you or your listeners this resonates with. It definitely doesn't with me. But I've got friends who bought a car when they didn't need one in their 20s in order to get a better credit score, so they'd have better credit in order to get a loan for a house at some point. And that's deep behavioral change because of an algorithm, and not an algorithm that's deployed by Netflix or whatever, right? But that's an algorithm that's out there impacting real world decisions, and there are lots of examples like that, right?
Oh
But I think
yeah.
that's a fascinating one as an Australian, where we don't have the same relationship
Oh, you
with
don't. Interesting.
credit and debt.
Oh,
No, we
interesting.
get a loan if we've demonstrated reasonably that we're good at saving and paying off debt.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. No, it's very
And it's
game too.
not as
Actually,
fragile. That's one of the tough things for me in the US is just thinking how difficult it is to get good credit and how easy it is to
it
get
can
bad
happen
credit.
overnight. It can happen overnight. Like
The
I've got,
asymmetry is wild.
I checked mine the other day. It was 825, which is like really good, really good credit.
Awesome.
Yeah, to get that though, like that's like you're being conscious of what you're doing,
Yeah, yeah.
and you're not making any mistakes. You're not going out and getting a $100,000 boat and then saying, "Oh shit, I forgot to make a payment on that," or five payments. Like that's just not what
Yeah.
you do.
Because you do
Right?
that on other people's credit cards, right? That's how
Yeah,
you get your boats.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I was like, yeah, Hugo, can I borrow your card real quick? Um,
Exactly.
you're just like, what the fuck just happened, Joe? Don't worry about it. Take you on a boat.
It was worth it, man. You're a good time.
Yeah, I'll get you a Cybertruck that way.
I can't. Oh
So,
my god. I mean, this is the world we live in, right? Like, I wish you were joking, but
well, I thought about it actually because I have a because here's about gaming too, right? So I got like gaming systems. So I have a Delta Diamond status right now, right? And
Mhm.
Delta changed their status program, so you have to spend in order to maintain Diamond, you have to have $28,000 in spend US. That's between cards, but mostly through spending on Delta. And do you realize
Mm.
how many flights you have to take to hit $28,000 in spend? A lot. And so, how much money you have to spend on your card to hit that amount? It's a ton. And so you're always thinking about this in the back of your head because for whatever stupid reason, you're like, well, if I don't maintain my status, like, what does that mean to me? Like, am I like
Mm.
a lesser person all of a sudden? Like, I have to go sit with like, and coach with the other people? Like, what? And these mind games start going to the end. You just take a step back, this is like the dumbest self conversation I've been having lately. Like, why are you even thinking about this? This is like, in the grand scheme of things, just means nothing at all. But it's in your head. Just
Absolutely.
so
Hey,
dumb.
the other thing that you mentioned, Paco Nathan, who I just remembered something. So I did a fireside chat with him a while ago for O'Reilly, and we'd had a wonderful prep call about it. And I thought I'll use ChatGPT to help synthesize bullet points and that type of stuff. So, and I was using the desktop app, which has like advanced voice mode or whatever. And I was like, hey,
Mm.
had a chat with Paco about the Paco Nathan, and because of my accent, it like spelt it Paco, like Puco or something. And 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 then I said, can you just give me some biographical details about Paco? And it didn't say to me, I don't know who Paco is or whatever. It made up his bio, and I was like,
Oh
"What are you
boy.
doing?" That's and I because I read it, and I was like, "That's not right." And I was like, "What are you doing?" And it's like, "Oh, I assumed you were talking. You wanted me to act as an assistant, talking about a fictional character called." Now, whether that explanation was right or not, I don't fucking know. But that's just one illustration that these things make up stuff a lot, forget stuff a lot, and are also people pleasing gaslighters. And I
Oh,
don't
for
think it's a
sure.
coincidence that we've created technologies in 2023 which are people pleasing gaslighters. Just to be very
Oh,
clear.
knowing Paco though, I think he would have appreciated you using that story as his intro and as his bio. That would have been hilarious.
Yeah, he would have loved that, wouldn't he?
Yeah, I mean, knowing
Um,
anybody, like Paco would have really loved that. So
and
it's
and the other thing that came to mind when you were talking was I think once again we just need to reset expectations around these things are nothing like what we think of as software. They're horrible calculators. I think is one of the greatest jokes in the world. Right? Like the famous example is they've had difficulty counting the number of R's in strawberry. Right?
that's a big one. Yep.
Um, And this even plays out, the fact that the advice is to not use them as calculators is so mind-boggling for a lot of people. So we need to kind of reorient our expectations. I also love then that, and it tells us about the challenge in moving to agents. Let's say you wanted to have a calculator attached to an LLM. How would you do that, right? The most naive way to do it is get it to execute some Python code, right? To be a calculator for you. Now, am I going to let an LLM execute arbitrary Python code on my laptop? Not at all, right? So then I've got to do some sort of containerization, and suddenly we discover like a lot of different failure modes and concerns purely because these things are horrible calculators, right? And I find that fascinating.
Well, it's funny because I have this old calculator here. It's really old.
Dude.
I think I did a couple of actuary tests on this, right? Which
amazing.
Are hard. And this was what you use for that. So I'm almost like, I mean, sometimes there's ways to solve problems. You can use nukes or you can use calculators. Man, just being the overly complicated one. So
I wouldn't mind getting an abacus one of these days, to be honest. But also, that's
I have one.
Amazing. Kind of nice, of course you do. You're always one step ahead, Joe.
I taught my kid to use. Well, that's how they learn to count.
Yes, exactly. And let's do more of that, man. I mean, in all honesty, that's why I understand why schools are like scared of AI. We're all scared of, or we all have like, I suppose, serious, valid concerns about it. But one thing I was frustrated at elementary school, what we call primary school in Australia, was just the amount of long division I had to do. I love maths. Like, I did my PhD in non-commutative algebra, and I was like, this is a recipe. I've done it 3 times. I know how to do it. Please stop, because we can do it with calculators now. Same thing with like matrix multiplication and row reduction and Jordan canonical form nonsense at college. But like, why are we doing all of this when we have machines that are good at it? They can do once again what they're good at, and we can learn stuff that's good for us.
Yeah, I wish math was taught differently. Well, at least I don't know. But when I did my math degree, it was we weren't allowed to use calculators. I don't think in most classes at all. Yeah, like
we were.
You were okay
in Australia, at
but
least.
But it was like long division, right? It was just like go prove this theorem, and you're like, okay, I'll go do that real quick, or not real quick.
Oh, and to that point, no, we probably weren't for like some of our number theory and analytical number theory courses.
Yeah.
Maybe we were for algebra and stuff, but you didn't even, like, if you're doing group theory and representation theory, I did a lot of pure math, right? So didn't really need calculators so much. Yeah.
But in regular school, everywhere, I think back in the day, everyone had the TI-85, I think was the big one, at least when I was growing up. Yeah. But for the actuary test, they just said, like, you just get this piece of crap and just use that. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Does everything you need.
Hey, how old's your kid or kids?
They're both 11 and 14.
Yeah, so what's their vibe with, like, at school, like, as particularly the 14-year-old, maybe it's a bit early, but thinking about, how does their school think about AI? How do you think about these conversations?
Oh, they aren't. That's the problem. So the issue that I have is, I mean, he's lucky he has me as a father, or maybe he's very unlucky, I don't know. But, he knows about AI because his dad, and there's books on AI everywhere, and that's all he talk about. So I think he's been cognizant of it for years. But it's interesting. Actually, one of my favorite talks I ever gave was I visited his 6th grade class at the time. That was a couple of years ago. And we just talked about AI for an hour. This is right when ChatGPT had come out, 6 months after, I think it was. And so the first thing I did was like, okay, so like, what do you think AI is? And like, well, it's going to take over. And I was like, what do you mean by that exactly? So we go through that. And then I had ChatGPT on my phone. I was like, okay, so let's go through and let's talk with AI. Let's talk to AI real quick, right? And so I passed it around. We asked it questions, and I think they started understanding the contours of, like, the boundaries of at least ChatGPT at that time. And then I get up on the whiteboard and I show them, okay, so in a very simple way, this is how machine learning works. There's inputs and there's an output, and this is how the model is trained. You want a really fun thing, go talk to kids about how to train AI model or machine learning. Like, you'll learn to simplify things really, really quick. But I think that was one of the best conversations I had, because it opened the kids' minds up to, like, they start doing all this bullshit like it's Terminator. Most of them go, well, not today. But
absolutely, I love that, and I haven't spoken with a lot of kids about it. I spoke with my baby boomer parents and their friends, and that feels like speaking to a child.
Well, I mean, it kind of can be,
yeah, and it's fantastic. And I'm half joking. My mum, for example, is she's not technical, but she's very sharp and technically savvy. As always, she was a barrister. She's semi-retired now, but a lawyer, always working on the forefront of technology in law. So having those
It's cool.
conversations is
Well, that
fascinating. But yes, children. I mean, of course, and understanding like what they think about it and just opening up that space seems super cool.
Well, it's super cool, and it's one of the things with my new company I'm really going to be hitting hard on is actually educating kids about AI, and I think hopefully giving them a better basis than the schools are doing right now. Because at least in America, the schools are really hamstrung in terms of what they can talk about and what they can teach. There's a thing called Common Core that every teacher has to teach to, and it's more of a federal curriculum. So,
Mm,
so we do a lot of extracurricular stuff, and so
amazing.
one of those things is, my 14-year-old though, right? He's starting to think about college, if that's really even a thing in the future, or jobs, and but he goes to career counseling or career class, and it's like I look at the list of jobs they're telling people to go to, I'm like, that's not even going to be a thing. That's not even a job today. Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is this is all bullshit.
Totally.
And so I think it's like robots can take that job away, not a problem.
Yeah,
So
I'd love to chat about that more with you and anyone else who wants to chat about this stuff. I think because by virtue of my work, like my consulting and education stuff, but I primarily work with developers to build data, AI powered software, and educate around that. But because there are so many mismatches between expectations in nearly every organization and what the technology is capable of, I
yeah,
mostly work with developers, but I usually just get floated up in the org and essentially have conversations with leadership and non-technical conversations. And I haven't done a lot of this, but I am personally very interested. If I had like 48 hours each day, like half of my work I'd actually want to do in non-technical conversations around AI and ML
this is
and data, and the other half totally non-technical.
I think this is the more important conversations. These are the more important conversations to be having right now because it's the decision makers, the non-technical people that are going to be making the decisions of like, what are we going to do with our engineering team, for example,
Mm,
right? Oh, I heard that Meta's not hiring mid-level software engineers anymore. I guess we won't either, right? Not even knowing if that's a good idea or not.
yep,
But these are the questions that a lot of boards and business leaders are having. Is and,
absolutely.
and you go to these conferences, right? So I go to I go to quite a few business oriented conferences where it's people kind of pretending they know about AI and stuff on these big keynotes and stuff, and business leaders talking about it, but nobody knows what the hell is going on, right? And I
Mm,
feel like these are, but they all want to have honest conversations about this stuff. It's not like I don't think they're intentionally trying to be manipulative or whatever. I just think that they've been asked to give a talk, they're giving a talk, right? It's good publicity for them. At the same
absolutely.
time, I think they want to have honest conversations about, okay, like what are people seeing out there? How are we doing this stuff? Like that's because especially if you're an executive at companies and you're a business leader, like the chance of you talking to other people outside your company, like you're kind of busy, right? So
Yeah. And I can honestly tell you, man, so part of the reason I love the technical stuff and want to keep working in that, but even to have these conversations and add the value I can, I think I need to have a very deep technical knowledge. But I've, in all honesty, recently been consulting for like one of the big consulting firms, right? And working with a lot of people there, and they've got leaders who are like, we need an AI strategy. And they're like, so we need to learn about transformers and I'm like, is that really what your boss means? And when we start talking with them, as it turns out, they want something that will create business value that they can call AI. Guess
yep,
what? Random forests, they're happy doing that. Logistic regression, they're happy doing that. If they get significant lift on their models, and it's cheaper as logistic regression, to your point earlier, is than using, the SOTA GPT like 11 point blurg, they can call it AI.
that's a win.
Everyone's happy, right?
That's
So
just it. That's a hand calculator, right?
yeah,
Logistic regression is a hand. I can do that in Excel. Program in
yep,
about 5 minutes, and it'll work. Uh,
yep,
and you're absolutely right. These are the conversations people need to have because I think there's a lot of vendor noise out there. Everybody wants a piece of this, a piece of whatever budget people are spending on AI right now, and there's a shit ton of hucksterism out there, and it's annoying as hell for people like you and me who then talk to companies and they're like, well, we were told that we have to do AI or we'll be left behind. I was like, well, what does that mean exactly? Like, what problems are you trying to solve? As you
dude.
point out, there's simple ways of doing stuff. Even like just regular old NLP's good enough for some tasks. Like you don't need to use an expensive API if you don't need to. Now go ahead and like, host a model if you want to your point earlier, but it's like there are cheaper ways of doing stuff. Especially when we're talking about tabular data, by the way, right? If you
Yeah,
mentioned random forest, XGBoost, logistic regression, whatever, like that's kind of in its own world, and it always has been in the world of AI and machine learning, because it's just like those data sets are gnarly as hell to
yeah.
work with. So yeah,
Exactly.
it's
And if you want like an image captioning model, let me just find this one. Yeah, you can use ChatGPT or whatever for that. But on Hugging Face, there's a great image captioning model from Salesforce called Blip, bootstrapping language image pre-training. And I do think we haven't talked about this at all, but it's inherent in a lot of what we're talking about. We're coming back to a world where composability and Unix philosophy reigns
yep,
supreme. You don't have one model to do everything,
bingo.
contrary to what Sam Altman and Satcher want us to think. Oh, well, Satcher's kept his mouth shut in a variety of ways, but if you want
He's
to
good like that.
combine, yeah, exactly, you can get
He's
these
smart.
best of breed models, and he is so smart, and he seems so lovely. He's like your lovely granddad, who's the nicest dude, but he must crack skulls as well
He's like a
to do.
granddad that used to work for the mob or used to be the mob boss, and he's just very quiet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love it after that whole OpenAI stuff. When he came out, like 3 days later, he was like, and his first statement was, "Hey, some things have happened, but just know that in the past few days, nothing has changed with respect to how we're working with OpenAI and the value we'll create for you
The
all." And then
dude's
he listed
godfather.
why, and then he checked out exactly. But yeah, the ability to have all these best of breed models and connect them in hopefully robust ways. I do think I used to live in a warehouse where we used to like use cable ties and like bad glue to like put up walls sometimes when we didn't have anything else, and I feel like that's machine learning essentially.
Kind of is.
Like we're still kind of like gluing all these things together, and I've got a friend who, when he started at Airbnb, he like there was a production model he needed results from, and he emailed the person running the project, and they like sent him a non-version CSV that wasn't even in a data store or wasn't even a version Google sheet, and they're like, "Oh yeah, these are the results from the run yesterday," and he's like,
Wait, what?
"What?"
Okay.
So like everyone does it, but yeah,
Yeah,
the
they do.
smaller high performant models. Matt Honnable, who started Spacey and still builds it within us, Montani, he has a great talk called something like how many data points do you need to get a BERT model giving you higher accuracy than
Hmm.
ChatGPT on a certain range of, and it was more
Interesting.
succinct than that, but these are the types of things we can do. These are the types of things you don't discover on LinkedIn necessarily, right? Or
Sure. Yeah.
TikTok for adults, as I like to call it these days.
Yeah.
And I love LinkedIn as well, by the way, right?
It's
In a
good.
variety
It's
of
good.
ways.
But I think it's good. It's good just for like kind of the general conversations, right? Talking
Yeah.
shop. But it's for the deeper stuff, like you say. That's
But
yeah,
the other thing, I taught this course recently on Maven. It's building LLM apps for data scientists and software engineers, and that's important because I love that. I used to teach scientific people how to build software. Now being able to teach software people how to use data and AI is fascinating. But there's a huge bottleneck once again where people were like, "How do I do these multi-agent systems? How do I evaluate them?" I'm like, look at the results, and you'll literally see that your embeddings model is where most of the failure is coming from.
mm,
And half the people, their initial response is, "Could I get an LLM to do that instead?" And I'm like, well, you could, but how do you trust that LLM? Like, you
yeah.
need to look at what it's like. You got to look at something to build trust with a system, right? And I think there is this thing in the cultural consciousness that we can get everything automated. And then I'm like, let's look at the traces and improve the system. Maybe even update the prompt or do a bit of fight. And people are like, "Oh, it's that easy?" And I was like, yeah, like it isn't that easy, but it is. That's the process is that simple to state, right? It isn't
Hmm.
out about getting another LLM as a judge. Of course, at some point, maybe you want to scale to have an LLM as a judge and use all of that knowledge to provide to that LLM. But in the end, you got to look at something to make sure your system's working, and it's not going to be LLMs all the way down.
Oh no, it's going to be LM calling your logistic regression model,
Yeah,
output of which feeds something else. I mean, that makes a lot more sense. Just the right tool for the right job. It's just kind of the old that's how it's always been. Just
Exactly.
LMs are good for some things. They suck at other things, like this. I use this, or I could use Excel. Like it's deterministic.
Mm,
I think the biggest differentiator is going to be, at least for me, like knowing when to use something that's probabilistic and has different degrees of probabilism, probabilities just based on like temperature and all this other stuff. You're talking large language, all the way down to okay, so yeah, traditional models, right? They just
yeah.
work. You know how they work. They're interpretable. Yeehaw. Doing this stuff for a long time, right? Like he's been around for a long time, so you kind of know how they work. There's not a lot of
Totally.
secrecy. Yeah,
Totally.
cool, man. I got to get going. It's Super Bowl Sunday, so I'm looking at the.
Dude, well, I
Of
appreciate you making the time
course,
on, Hey,
on the Sabbath, really, it literally is too.
exactly. Well,
But
funny data fact. I found this is 5 or 6 years old. How many chicken wings are eaten in America on average on Super Bowl Sunday?
how many?
1.2 billion.
Okay,
So
that's a lot.
that's on
more than I
average.
guessed.
Yeah, but I think because it's it's 4 or 5 per person on average, and you've got a whole bunch of people who eat 1 or 2, a whole bunch of people who eat none. But then you've got like your uncle, chubby Uncle Joe up the back who'll like smash 30 or something like
That
that.
makes sense, though. Okay, so I'm looking at the stats from last year, and it was like 123, basically 124 million viewers. It's supposed to be bigger this year, but yeah, your math checks out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could, beer, chips, yeah.
Dude, I lived in the US for the best part of a day, and I grew to love Bud Light while living there.
Oh, it's not a bad beer.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
It's a-
I'm more a fan of crafty stuff to be, and I have to looking like
Yeah.
this, right? And having lived in New York.
Yeah, you,
but-
you look like an IPA guy, but
Yeah, but when I'm in, because I used to go to Sci-Fi a lot. I'd go to Texas in summer. Like, I can't drink an IPA in Texas in summer. Like, I want like water with a bit of beer in it. To be honest,
that's true.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Your choices like Corona, Bud Miller.
Yeah.
It's
Um,
fun times.
Well, dude,
Yeah.
that was a really fun chat, and
Yeah.
I'm glad we finally met in person and got to do stuff like this.
That's fun. Yeah, for sure. We'll maybe I'll be on your podcast at some point, but we'll
I look
play
forward to
run
it.
to each other at some end of the earth. So yeah,
Yeah,
awesome, dude.
yeah. I'm wondering maybe we should do something with Paco sometime, or K-Jam, or get a bunch of people together to have a fun chat. I don't know.
Let me make a note of that. Actually, that'd be kind of fun.
Maybe I mean, I'd be excited to invite you all on my podcast, and we could just have a panel chat about a bunch of stuff.
Let's do that. That'd be dope.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
Awesome. Jepson might be cool to have on it as well.
Jepsen would be cool. Carly
I don't
Taylor
know.
would be good too. She was supposed to be on our panel.
Oh, yeah,
and then I
that's
was
right.
I was the sloppy seconds on that one. So
That's cool. Yeah, I just don't want to deal with comms. Do I still have to work with a fucking comms?
no,
I'm having
she's
to
all
work with
good.
a comms
She's all
team.
good.
Okay.
No, she's not there anymore. So she's clear. She actually
Okay,
kind of is like one of my semi-regular co-hosts of my podcast now. So
Oh, awesome.
yeah.
That'd be fun. Great. Well, let's do
Awesome,
it. And have a great Super Bowl Sunday. Hey, when are you going to put this out?
That's
Do
be out in
you-
a couple of weeks. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Just
All
ping
right,
me
yeah.
whenever.
Okay,
I'll share it. All right. See you, man.
All right, later, dude. Hold on.